everybody. I'm Jodi Buckman. I work for the ASPCA. I'm the Vice President of Grants at the A. I have worked in animal sheltering for about 30 years. Started my career as the Executive Director of the Bangor Humane Society right out of college. It was a great opportunity for a young woman who just turned 21. Thank goodness. I was old enough to drink legally. So lots of opportunities to work in sheltering, both at a national level and a local level. In shelters for American Humane for a while, for the ASPCA. At the A, I've done work as an advisor and a consultant on public policy issues, helped guide our work in animal sheltering generally. I've been part of the community outreach team, got involved with the grants team to really think about how to strategically use our grant money at the ASPCA, which is $10 to $13 million a year, depending on the year and the budget and other projects going on. And I'm really enjoying kind of diving deeply into the grants world. Right before I started focusing on grants management, part of my job was national outreach at the ASPCA. So Shelly and I have worked together in that capacity, her at Maddie's, me at the A, on national scale projects, which is part of what we're going to talk to you about today and in the context of grant making.
Shelly Thompson, I am the Director of Grants at Maddie's Fund. I've been with them for 17 years. My life before that was in software. So I came into this industry with knowledge of databases and working with data. So that's what I bring. And we work together on the board for Shelter Animals Count and also Animal Grantmakers.
Yep. So we'd love to know a little bit about you guys, kind of who's in the room. Who works for an organization with a budget under $500,000 a year? Okay, and under $1 million? Over $1 million? It's like a split, not bad. Anybody work for a municipal organization? Contracts, but you're a nonprofit. Okay. So nonprofit with contracts and just straight up nonprofit, no contracts. Again, a pretty healthy split. Mm-hmm. Fabulous. Okay. So we're going to talk about data first, Sheltering Animals Count and the national database. It is a project we've been involved in really from inception. Mm-hmm. Both Shelly and I, serving on the board of directors and hiring our first CEO about 2 years ago. So our roles have changed, but super excited about this project because so much of what we do in animal sheltering and welfare now is driven by data and money. And in order to get the money, you really need to be able to talk about data and impact in your community. So we're going to try to pull those things together. Did anybody come to this session with a particular burning question that you want answered? Just kind of want to hear from you guys before I dive in. Yeah.
We're having some issues with getting grants because of how we're reporting how much we spend, specifically for spay neuter,
Mm-hmm.
and how much does the spay neuter really cost?
So her question is how to calculate the cost of spay neuter. Are you a nonprofit spay neuter organization? So what is the full cost? Do you include essentially what most people describe as overhead in the calculation, or do you just focus on kind of consumables? And I have some ideas about that, but let's see where we can get to in the conversation and see if we can't fold that in. We're going to try to leave some time at the end for questions. Yes?
I struggle when I do my animal count where I'm pulling my numbers from. The reports I get, we use Chameleon, and the statistic report I get out of Chameleon doesn't match the questions that Shelter Count is asking. So I feel like I'm doing a lot of adding these together, subtracting these to get the number that it's actually asking for. So I'd like some clarification on where I should be pulling those numbers from.
Sure. So the question is how to essentially get the data you need to complete the basic data matrix and Shelter Animals Count using Chameleon data. And you were going to refer straight to Marie, who's one of the staff at Shelter Animals Count, because there are some standardized reports that you can pull from some of the systems. She knows Chameleon fairly well, so we're just going to hook you up with the professional right off the bat and get you talking to Marie. So her email address is in the presentation, but if you don't catch it, just come see us and we'll get you connected.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Sort of a problem question at the same time. So small, rural, municipal, just this January started with the data, with the database. Everything has been all paper all these years.
Yep.
We're rural, we struggle with having internet daily and phones sometimes. So like we were out of internet for a month. So our shelter manager is like, it's lost. It's like we've got so much time to catch up. So the data that I've got everything in Shelter Animals Count, it's all off of my added, which is, I still do my numbers on paper to make sure it matches Shelter Manager. And that's a struggle to match up every month. I'm not trusting my Shelter Manager because I know what I'm counting is exactly correct. I don't separate puppies and adults. How much difference is, it's not important to me at this point, but how important is that to everybody else?
So your question is about the challenges of living in a rural community without proper access to the internet. Can't fix that for you today. I would recommend that you that you really look at something that is computer-based as opposed to cloud-based. And I know that's getting harder and harder to do. But our software providers really need to be able to provide software solutions that reside in the computer for rural communities, because it's still, you know, some of the organizations that have the greatest struggles are in the most remote places. I live in the Southwest, and you know, you can go a long ways without cell phone service, internet service, power. There's like 30% of the Navajo Nation doesn't have power to houses yet or indoor plumbing. You know, and we think we're an advanced country. Your other question was about reconciliation and tracking numbers and so forth. Let us move through the presentation and maybe have a one-on-one conversation after the fact. I think that, again, a computer program or spreadsheet that resides on the computer itself as opposed to in the cloud is really got to be the solution for you, so that whether or not you need power, but you don't need phone and you don't need internet to be able to do your work. Yeah, really practical problem, but a big one.
Does anybody have software-based data, or what do you call it, program? Data
Yeah.
program? Yeah.
Let's talk after.
Okay.
If they do offer an in-house option, it's just different.
Okay.
So that was a question about whether or not there was a version of the program that she's using that resides on the computer. So that would be huge, huge. Cool. All right, we just thought, you know, every session, is it mostly about fundraising? Is it mostly about data? These questions are about all of the above. So let's talk a little bit about Shelter Animals Count. How many organizations already submit data to Shelter Animals Count? Awesome, about half the room, that's great. So we're gonna go through this fairly quickly and see if we can leave time at the end for continued kind of questions and conversation and get to any specifics that you guys are curious about. So Shelter Animals Count, these were the organizations that got together in the beginning, along with the National Federation of Humane Societies and a few other groups, to really have a conversation about what it would take to have a national database of sheltered animals. In the nonprofit sector, every other part of industry gathers data nationally, talks about it nationally, is able to speak to impact nationally, and we can't, we don't. So we wanted to complete that. I can't believe it was back in 2011. Feels like a long time ago. So we got together. There had been many other efforts to do this, and we really have been successful because we came together to really just focus on collecting data. So we left our organizations behind. When we walked in the door to sit down at the table and work on this project, we all just focused on the collection of data and the creation of a national database. And it was an extraordinary opportunity for all of us to participate in creating something that didn't exist and would really be in service to the community. So these are the reasons why. Learn how many dogs and cats come in and out of shelters. We've had a lot of questions about what about the others, the pocket pets, equine, and so forth, but we thought let's start with this. We continue to have conversations about how to capture the other populations of animals that exist in shelters, but this has been challenging enough to start with dogs and cats. And there was a question about kittens versus adult cats and puppies versus dogs. Do what you can do, and be as accurate as possible with the numbers. A lot of organizations can easily split between juvenile and adult, and a lot of organizations can't. And then we just roll them up as canines. So we believe that every organization should have the capacity to split between juvenile and adult, and are even talking about adding a neonate category, but do what you can. Basic data matrix we'll look at in a minute. That provides what we believe to be the kind of most basic level of data collection any shelter should be considering. And then we were trying to, of course, standardize data reporting across the country nationally. So simple, cumulative. We're not collecting animal by animal information. We're collecting cumulative monthly data. And in the most basic form, like at a minimum, this is what we believe organizations should be collecting in terms of data. This is our mission statement: to create, share, and steward the national database of sheltered animals, to provide facts and enable insight so that we can all save lives. It's really just about the outcome. We really see the database as data belonging to the shelters who submit the data. So we're the organization that provides the infrastructure. We work with the data and work with you to ensure that it's accurate, give you tools to try to utilize it, but the data itself belongs to the field. The board has extraordinary representation. National organizations who are also funders serve on the board of directors, but we're full board members, so when we're at that table, my ASPCA hat is off, and I sit at the table thinking about my fiduciary responsibility to shelter animals count, as do all these other organizations. It's really all of the national organizations are here that are involved directly and regularly in animal sheltering. The funders continue to be the national organizations primarily, and then a few private foundations here and there that we aren't as familiar with. Of course, Maddie's is a private foundation. So the universities you see represented, we do try on the board to combine a mix of folks who provide leadership at a national level and researchers who are really thinking about data from the research perspective. They are a complete pain in the patootie sometimes because, oh my goodness, can they dive deep down a rabbit hole with the data. But it keeps us really true and authentic to the purpose of the database. Because if the data isn't accurate, clean, and we don't examine it with kind of rigor on a regular basis, then it has less value. So I'm kidding. They're extraordinary and they're bright and only drive us half crazy, not all the way crazy. It's a great group. We also have a mandate that at least 20% of board members need to be shelter leaders. So just trying to balance the engagement of national organizations and so forth with people who do the day-to-day work of operating a shelter. These are our staff. Marie is the person someone wants to talk to. You want to talk to, yes. So Sarah Kent is our CEO. She was a pet finder for many years. We feel really blessed to have her sit at the head of our organization as our first CEO. Marie is the data manager, and she does an extraordinary job working in the database all the time and trying to think about the use of the data, how we get the data in, what the visualization can look like. She comes from a shelter background, so she really understands the day-to-day challenges of shelters and works with us to try to keep the system working smoothly for the member shelters. And Alex works with us on and off now, but she's the outreach manager, so you might hear from her if we're trying to get a hold of somebody in your community, a shelter that isn't currently working with us that we'd love to get on board. We're trying to get at least 80%, the organizations that handle 80% of animal intake in the 50 most populous counties in the country. So the most populous counties in the country, the organizations in all those counties that handle 80% or more of the animal intake. If we get to that point, and we've got a national number. It's not perfect, but it's close enough to call it national. So collecting data. I'm going to just talk about the basic data matrix and then turn it over to Shelly. The beginning animal count and the ending animal count are the most important components of this particular form. So this is where you actually enter the data that is going to be collected by the national database, and the beginning and ending count is what allows you to double check what's come in and what's gone out. Because in the end, you can use those numbers to kind of calculate if you're missing anybody. And one of the things that we've learned relative to all these categories and the tracking of data generally is the importance of daily counts, which I know is really tough for some organizations given levels of staffing. But there's really no substitute for walking through the shelter and counting the animals. Like, it's really so important. Put eyes on them. If you don't do it, you're going to have problems in your numbers and not necessarily know it. So, basic data matrix. Stray and at large, self-explanatory. Relinquished by owner, self-explanatory. Owner intended euthanasia. I'm going to skip for a minute. Transferred in are when we move animals within the sheltering system. So when we include those numbers, we're talking about gross animal intake and gross animal outcomes. When we don't include those numbers, we're talking about net numbers, right? Think of us as a big system. If the animals stay in the system, then those are the gross numbers, but we're counting some animals multiple times, right? Because they've moved from one shelter to another. They haven't moved out of the system yet. So a net number, you would not include transfers in or transfers out. Does that make sense? Okay. System, in or out. Adoption, return to owner, transferred out. Oh, other intakes. I'm sorry, I skipped that one. That's where you put cruelty cases. Animals, there are 500,000 reasons in the world why animals come into our organizations. If it doesn't belong in the other categories, it belongs there, right? It's the catch-all. Like, shows up at the back door. That's a stray, or maybe you call it something else. Adoption, return to owner, transferred out, return to field. Our definition of return to field is that you admitted it to the shelter. So if we talk about feral cats, for example, if a feral cat comes in with a feral cat caregiver, receives a service, and then goes home, that animal was never admitted to the shelter. It came in for a service and left. So that should not be counted on the basic data matrix anywhere. That's a service you provided that's incredibly important, but is not a shelter intake. If the animal came in as a stray, and in your community, you're allowed to return that animal back after it's been fixed to where it was found, that's a return to field, because it was admitted to the organization as a stray and then returned to the field. You guys follow us? Okay. Died in care, lost in care, shelter euthanasia, owner intended euthanasia. So owner intended euthanasia shows up both as an intake and an outcome, because we were struggling with the fact that a lot of organizations don't necessarily have a clinic associated with them. And when an animal comes into the shelter at the request of the owner to be euthanized, how do we kind of define that? Because we know that the relationship with the owner and what they're thinking at the time that they come to the shelter can really be different. Like, they can bring us a dying 19-year-old diabetic cat and say, oh, please find it a new home. You're like, I'm so sorry, I wish we could, your cat is suffering, we either need to get you to a veterinarian to alleviate suffering or consider euthanasia. How can we help you today? And maybe it's just that they needed somebody else to say that it's time, right? We know those things happen. So what we were trying to do is say, how can we really be clear about when that decision is made. And by saying owner intended, we thought when the owner comes in the door, what were they coming to request? So even with that owner that came in the door to request that you place their diabetic 19-year-old suffering cat, the intention was to request placement. So that's relinquished by owner. Even though we know if the animal stays at the shelter, it's likely a euthanasia, it was not owner intended. So what was the intent of the owner when they walked through the door? And then the outcome for those animals is if it came in as owner intended euthanasia and it went out as owner intended euthanasia, then that's the outcome. We also know that sometimes owners bring us animals that they intend to have euthanized, but we can do something for that animal and it doesn't necessarily need to be euthanized. So, got that? Any questions about the basic data matrix?
Could you have a relinquished by owner income or intake with an owner intended euthanasia outcome after having that conversation?
Probably not. Probably not, because what we're trying to do is measure the owner's intent at the beginning
Right.
as opposed to the counseled. And the challenge nationally, and I'm going to be really frank here, is that if organizations keep counseling people, including we can't place your animal, whatever the reason, and so we're going to have you sign it over as an owner requested euthanasia, if the purpose for doing so is to not have to count that as a shelter death, that's not transparency to your community. Because the reality of that is that you didn't have the resources needed to save that animal. So what we're trying to do is help shift the way we think about data, not to get to a particular percentage or a level of performance as an organization inauthentically. We want you to be transparent and clear. Because really, how do you make the case for the resources that you need to do the job right and well if we're not being authentic, transparent, and clear in our data? So that's a tough one.
Well, we do it the way it's intended to do.
Sure.
Your explanation
Yep.
led me with that. Well,
Yep.
Maybe we're doing it.
It's a great question. Yeah. And I wish we could just live that way, right? I wish it wasn't such a big deal. Yeah. But when our performance gets judged based on a percentage as opposed to just straight up numbers or otherwise, well, good for you. Good for you.
It's good.
It's just it's nationally we have these conversations because we want to try to figure out how do we motivate, how do we engage not only the shelter part of our world but the public and really inspire them to help support organizations and drive change. So we talk about that a lot, and in fact recently talked about that particular category a whole lot. Yeah. Over to you.
All right. So for those of you who are part of Shelter Animals Count, this hopefully looks familiar to you. This is when you first log in or first get registered, this is what you see. It gives you a quick overview, we call it the data portal. It gives you a quick overview of where you are in submitting your data. The green check marks say, yep, you've submitted your data, it's all complete. The yellow I lets you know that it's incomplete, and the red X says it hasn't been submitted at all yet. So just kind of let you know what you need to do for your data. Also gives you a quick snapshot of the numbers that you're looking at for total intakes and total outcomes. You also have a menu on the right-hand side that can get you to all sorts of good information. Brand new, you can import your data. So what Jodi showed you, the basic data matrix, is what you're doing to manually enter the data. You can also import the data now. And I believe I've got a screenshot of that. So not all software vendors have this ability yet. So if your software vendor does not have this available, talk to them, have them reach out to Shelter Animals Count to see how they can create this for you. Also on our website is information on which vendors are doing this. So you just run a quick report that will export the data into a CSV file. You then import that CSV file into Shelter Animals Count. So you can run multiple months of data all at once. and just bring it right in. So super quick and easy way to get, especially if you want like historical data. If you've got a database that has years worth of data, you can run one report to get years of historical data into shelter animals count. So help us build our database and give a much larger picture of what's been happening. Also new are some data visualizations. So for your own organization, you can now visually see what your data looks like that's in shelter animals count. We've got, I think, 8 different ways of looking at the data. So this first one is just a quick overview for a particular year of your intakes, your live outcomes, and your other outcomes. And then there's a few other ones that you can look at. So lots of different charts, lots of different ways of really looking at your data and digging in and seeing what it's telling you. The other side of that, so beyond just your personal data, we've got the public-facing database, so which is published quarterly. We used to be semi-annually, now we're publishing it on a quarterly basis. So every 3 months we add new data and push it out there, and there's lots of different data visualizations available for you to take a look at and see. You can compare your shelter to another shelter, similar demographics, geography, human population, median income, whole variety of different metrics that you can compare and contrast. This is the first dashboard. Just kind of gives you, we've got I think 4 different main dashboards that give you kind of like a summary view, and then for each of those you can delve in even deeper. So just lots of different ways of looking at the data, and we give you the number of organizations that are participating in that particular data set, which year you're looking at, the gross intake, the net intake, what Jodi was talking about earlier. We've got the gross and the net for intake and outcomes. So we give you all those summary numbers, and you can dig in to individual organizations, individual communities. So lots of really, really great information. So I highly recommend you go to shelteranimalscount.org, click on data, and you can start looking at these dashboards and really digging into your community, neighboring communities, comparing your community and your organization with other organizations. Another cool tool that we have is the Coalition Builder. So I've showed you how you can look at your own organization. Oh, let me back up really quick. For the data sets that are published quarterly, if you're not finding what you need in the data visualizations, if you want to really dig into the individual data more, you can request the data set. We've got the full data set that's available that you can request. If you're part of Shelter Animals Count, you can get it for free. And if you aren't, then there's some different levels of how to get it. So additionally, if you don't want to wait for those quarterly publishes, if you've got some shelters that you work with on a regular basis, you're part of a coalition, you can create a coalition within Shelter Animals Count to be able to look at your data together on a regular basis. Yes?
How do we request the data set?
Go to shelteranimalscount.org to request the data set, and you can just, I think it's under data, and request the data set.
There's a form to complete, and it includes things like the reason you're requesting the data. If you're requesting the data to attack your neighboring shelter, just give you a hot hint, we're going to say no.
No. We're all about collaboration and positive and working together. So if you're using it to bash and trash, that's really not what we're looking to do with the data. It's all about how we can help each other and build each other up. So the Coalition Builder, it really gives you a chance to see the data real time. So if you've got community with 4 different shelters, you can roll your data up together and look at that data on a monthly basis and kind of track how you're doing, talk with each other. There's all kinds of different coalitions out there. Maddie's Fund has a coalition, so anyone that we've given a grant to, we ask them to join our coalition so that we can kind of track and see where our money is having its impact. And then here's the contact information for Shelter Animals Count, the website, Sarah, who's our CEO, and general questions is the info@ email address. And
The info@ goes both to Maria and Sarah.
It goes to both of them? Okay, cool.
You could always use the info@ and it's going to get to a real person.
Yeah. Right, back to you
Any
now.
questions? Yeah. Any questions for us about Shelter Animals Count? I know half of you are already using it. Were you guys aware of the tools that were available in the system? Yes and no? Okay. Yeah, we've worked really hard on the data visualization so that if you got in a regular kind of habit of going in and looking at your data, if there's a visualization that's powerful to you, then you can pull it out and use it in reports to your board, to your community. You could have it link up with your website. Lots of ways to use that. And if you request the whole data set, do it on a day when your internet connection is strong. It's a big file. Okay. So now we wanted to dive in a little bit on work related to giving and grant making and data. So data is interesting because it's only valuable if it's accurate. It's only valuable if it's put into some context so that you can understand the story that it's telling you about the work that's being done. A lot of us get all tied up in data and thinking about data, but in our world, every single data point is a wet nose, right? And we don't lose sight of that at Shelter Animals Count or Maddie's or the ASPCA. So we think a lot about data. What do we ask for? When do we ask for it? Right now in the ASPCA's grant making system, we ask for a lot of different things, and I'm moving our system along toward actually requesting less data on the upfront and thinking more about data in the reporting and the outcome measures related to grant making as opposed to the decisions that we make on the front end. So for those organizations interested in funding from the ASPCA, if I know the conference has had a lot of conversation already about disaster work. If your organization is in the midst of a natural disaster or you have a disaster at your facility, God forbid a fire, a flood, or something else of that nature, we do consider that to be a disastrous situation. Certainly contact the ASPCA and request funding. It is always smart to build a relationship with the organization ahead of time before we get the request. I can tell you that my team right now is kind of down to bare bones while we are kind of restructuring the work of the ASPCA's grants. And I am doing the initial due diligence on grants. And an organization just today issued an application, put all the effort into it for a $25,000 ask. And I've not heard of the organization. They hadn't reached out to us. They hadn't talked to anybody on staff. There's a place where you can put that in the application, and they didn't even get past due diligence. I declined the application an hour ago because I don't have a budget for that. They haven't built a relationship. It's not a program where we solicit grant funding for. And we make exceptions all the time, but we make exceptions when we've built a relationship with the grantee, we understand their need, and we understand how support from our organization is going to help them be successful in the long run. So for the ASPCA, if you're a mid-sized to small organization, honestly, your very best chances at grants are RFPs. When we issue a proposal and say, we're requesting applications to accomplish A, B, or C, those are your very best opportunities. They're not big grants. They often are going to help you do work you're doing anyway, but we'll help pay for it. But signing up for on ASPCA Pro and having regular kind of watching for those opportunities to respond to an RFP is really your best opportunity to receive grant funding. If you're a larger organization, your opportunities are a little bit different because we have some flexibility for large grants. If we believe, and I use this language specifically, they are going to change the world. So we tried this last year. We call them Spark grants. They're really around innovation. And we issued a general RFP requesting that organizations submit applications that describe an innovative program. And we got 700 responses. and we advanced 2. It was really challenging because what I realized in our RFP is that I really had not clarified that it needs to be innovative for the field to receive the level of funding that we were talking about, not innovative for your community. And that was the real challenge. Yes?
What were the 2 projects that
One of them was, are you guys familiar with Dogs Playing for Life? So Dogs Playing for Life is really about getting the pups outside and having a good time, right? Like, it is such an awesome, simple idea. And one of the organizations proposed the equipment and a little staff time needed to record those sessions so that when the dogs were back in the kennels, there would be like mini iPads effectively where you could watch those videos. So the video would be right there and you could just hit it and you could see that dog in that kennel having a fabulous time outside with his buddies. Like a way to make it real, given that not everybody is going to see the dog outside while it's having a good time. Yeah. And then the other one was a shelter that was building a facility on a campus, right on campus for a college or university. And it was like an exercise program to engage the students, especially as freshmen, to wear Fitbits and record their steps while taking dogs for walks and create like competitions and clubs around that and so forth. So, and even though both of those grants weren't actually at a level at which I had considered funding, they both were smaller than I was looking for. The Fitbit project did not get funded, and these decisions are made by the executive leadership team. We kind of escalate these to the leaders of the ASPCA, the very top level officials at the A. But the iPad one was funded. Yeah. Super fun, just about to get the reports on those grants, and so I'm hoping it'll result in some stories and learnings in Pro. We'll publish it and make it available to everybody. Yeah, those were the 2. It was things like, we're going to have a promotion on black dogs, spay neuter. Okay, go for it. But not what I was talking about. So if you're a larger organization, and smaller organizations can do this too, if you have really strong leadership, how would you change the world? Like, if you think really big and really carefully about how the world would actually change in your community, what could you do if you had the resources? You know, the levels of funding that I'm talking about for these kinds of projects, these are the things I'm hunting for, are $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year for multiple years. So, much bigger. Okay, so.
Are you still doing this work, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and I'm cultivating them. There will never be an RFP again. That was a lot of work. And I was gone the month they all came in. I took a month off last year, went on a road trip. Anybody ever need a break?
Yeah.
After 30 years, I really needed a break, so I left. And then 700 applications came in. My boss had to review them. She's like, these are crap. And I left my phone at home. I didn't even take it with me, so yeah, I didn't know until I got back. So, so for the ASPCA, sign up for ASPCA Pro, watch for the RFPs. We are sometimes hunting for people to give $5,000 to. It's like $5,000 to do an event, an adoption event. Just have fun with it. It's general stuff. If you are one of those people that's always thinking about how to actually solve the problems of the world, build some relationships with folks. Start with me. Send me an email. Talk to me about what's going on in your community. Let me hook you up with other people. If you're in New York, this is our home. You know, I know we're based in the city. I know most of the work that we do in New York is in the city. But New York is still our home state, and we have opportunities to try to provide support to our colleagues here in New York State. And if you're a really big thinker, I want to talk to you. I want to it's really got to be, how would you change the world? I have 2 projects right now that I'm thinking about. One of them would create actually sustainable access to veterinary care, like actual sustainability. It would pay for itself. An incredibly cool project that I'm talking to a CEO about. And the other project is a large urban organization thinking about building in an incredibly rural, impoverished part of the West, a shelter that is really just a place where a couple of fabulous animals are out for adoption, and everything else about that shelter is designed to bring them in and make them ready to be transported. Steel-sided building, like not an expensive building to, and I want to give them millions. Like, that's huge as someone who loves to live where you can't get internet. Okay. So, talking about the reality, our budget for grants is about $13 million a year. And the ASPCA does work with farm animals. We have grants to organizations that help with certification and improving welfare standards for animals that are raised for consumption. We do disasters, we do anti-cruelty cases. If your organization gets hit upside the head with a horrible cruelty case, please reach out to us and tell us what's going on, what the costs are, and if you need help, be sure that you've followed the law and that you have jurisdiction, either in partnership with or direction of the local law enforcement officials. We can't help support investigations that didn't happen the way they were supposed to. We do behavior rehabilitation, and if your organization is ready to really kind of dive into helping dogs who are fearful, we can help you with that through training at our facility in Asheville, North Carolina. ASPCA's breadth is huge. We cover investments in other organizations in many, many different ways. If you want to know kind of what the opportunities are, ASPCA Pro, the grants page, is always the place to kind of check it out. And we are in the process of changing things. So I am trying to think really big picture, because we not only want to fund organizations who have the capacity to change the world, we also want to be able to learn from those experiences and figure out how to package it and share that information with others. So I think of them not only as opportunities to really shift what's happening in animal welfare in a community, but then also roll it out and help others do the same. And if we do that, then I'd help pay for that too, trying to help pay that forward. Relationships are key. Where do your biggest gifts come from? Except for the crazy old lady who died and left you everything, and nobody knew that she had millions of dollars, right? Except for that, right? Your best donors are the ones that you've built a relationship, who know you, who've invested in your organization emotionally, as well as in terms of money. And we're no different. Like, if we know you and we trust you, you're the organization we're going to want to invest in, because we're going to see the relationship between your impact. We're going to know what data to request and be able to tell a story about your work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so Maddie's fund, I will preface this all with, we are in the middle of strategic planning. So I do not know what our grant opportunities are going to be for this next year. So for sure, sign up for the Maddie Network, and we will let you know as opportunities arise. I do know that we care deeply about data. Data has always been core to what we do, and it will continue to be that way. So Shelter Animals Count, being a participant in Shelter Animals Count, submitting your data on a regular basis, that is a requirement. It will continue to be a requirement. We also believe in transparency, in letting your community know what is happening in your organization. So posting your stats on your website. If there's a story that you want to tell to frame those stats, by all means do that, and let them know. It's your way of saying, here's what's happening and here's how you can help. Because your organization doesn't exist in a vacuum, it doesn't exist on its own, it is part of the community. So being able to share with that community what's happening and how they can be a part of it is your way of being able to help carry it even further forward than where you already are. So our grant funding has typically been for shelters, rescue organizations, and vet schools. We've also recently been expanding a little bit more into the access to care side of things, the keeping pets in homes side of things. So there have been some clinics that have gotten funding from us. While they don't need to be part of Shelter Animals Count, because you can't be a part of Shelter Animals Count, we do still think it's important for you to be sharing your stats as well. So while you will be able to say, no, you are not part of Shelter Animals Count, and that won't be a requirement, we do still want to see where you're sharing with your community what you're doing and the impact that you're having. So there are always stats. No matter what you're doing, there's data that you can share. And that data tells us what impact we're making with our grant dollars and what impact you're making in your community. We have always thought that your data is your way of seeing where you've been, where you are today, and where you're going. That data, once you start digging into it, can really tell you, wow, I had no idea that cats were my biggest problem. I thought for sure it was black dogs. But when you get into the data, you can really find out what the issues are, and that can really help shape what programs you want to do. So that's what we're all about.
We require Shelter Animals Count too, but currently for only certain kinds of grants. We give a lot to organizations that aren't sheltering organizations, so we're still working out the details of when we require it and how we build that into the system so that it's really easy for the grantee. We're constantly, as grant makers, trying to balance what do we need, how do we make it as easy as possible for grantees, how do we ensure that we can be accountable for the money that we've invested and see the impact. It's one of the reasons why we really are encouraging funders nationally to require participation in Shelter Animals Count and have that be the source of data so that you guys just have to report it here and then not have to report it to funders.
One-stop shopping.
Yeah, that's our hope.
Is that our last slide?
Yeah. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, everybody.